presentation 4 of this series of marine biology and behavioural ecology lectures on board the Smiling Seahorse. Moving on to communication today, so communication on the reef and beyond. We're going to be talking a little bit about the introduction to what communication actually is, the intricacies involved in communication, and then also some examples of communication on the reef, and some also more interesting, exciting developments in communication that's been found out recently in science. So to understand some of the communication on the reef, first we need to delve a little bit into what communication actually is. So obviously we communicate all the time. We know that other things and other organisms communicate all the time. But there is a very, very specific definition to what communication is. And communication is the transmission of information from one organism to another. And this involves 3 distinct things: a sender, myself, a signal, me transmitting information, and a receiver being the audience here. And this is communication. But with a sender, a signal, and a receiver, it's important to know that with communication there is always a benefit to both the sender and the receiver. This benefit could be different things. It could be that myself, the sender, I am angry or I am threatened by the audience. Much like a crab is threatened when the diver comes up with their torch and looks into their little coral home. And it sends a signal, and this signal could be for the crab waving its claws up in the air, making itself look as big as possible in the direction of the receiver. Now, there is a benefit to both the sender and the receiver here. The sender, the crab, this is benefiting the crab by potentially stopping predation or any potential damage to themselves. The receiver, being the potential predator of this little coral crab, is also getting a benefit. It's being shown that this crab has defense mechanisms, and if it was to try and predate on this crab, then it might end up getting a nip. So this sender, signal, and receiver is communication, and like I said, there is a clear benefit to both the sender and the receiver. This signal is an evolved trait that has a signal is a trait that has evolved to transmit information. So this signal could be any behavior really. For us it's often verbal or movement of hands, but there are many, many different examples of signals in the animal world. So there is a very, very key difference here between a signal, like I said, this transmission of information, and the cue. So a cue involves inferring information only, and this cue often does not have benefits for both the sender and the receiver. So we have here a picture of trees, and these trees are giving off movement. The wind is blowing them, they are moving, and we as the receiver, we know that there is wind because of the movement of these trees. We're inferring information from this cue. However, the sender, the trees, is not benefiting at all. There is no benefit. It's an inanimate object that is just being blown by the wind. So this is a cue. It's the inferring of information rather than the transmission of information that benefits both the sender and the signal. Communication is also used both inter and intra-specifically. So it's used between species, between individuals, between groups. There is many, many forms of communication in the animal kingdom, and they're all very, very important. And communication occurs in a lot of different environments and a lot of different contexts on the reef. Obviously, talking about their predation and predator-prey dynamics, it could be used to warn off predators using displays of size. So we can see in these slides here, we have the crabs and the prawns giving a mural spread, as they're known, which is putting their claws up and making themselves look really big. They can do this to us if we go and have a look into some of its home coral. They'll often be doing this. Communication also occurs in groups, so potentially in trying to signal when there is danger or where there is potential food. Territorialism, this is the same. Here we have displays of this I'm the biggest, you don't want to mess with me within territorial behaviour. Attraction, so sexual attraction or sexual fitness is something that I've mentioned as well. Bigger claws, more colourful beaks, things like this create attraction for attracting mates, and this is communication, and they do this in a range of different ways. It can be really interesting. Communication often occurs when competing for resources. However, communication is the first step towards animal contest and animal competition. So animals don't want to fight, they don't want to waste energy or resources on aggression. However, communication can be used as a potential first step to stopping these confrontations while still showing that it's their territory, or warning off others for in competition of resources. So the evolution of communication. Communication is, as a lot of things are in the animal kingdom, an associated learning process. So this is what ritualization is known as. Evolved learned association. At first, an animal might give a random signal. It might move a fin in a specific way. It might put a claw in the direction of the predator. And it's turned out that this movement was actually beneficial to the sender as well as the receiver. So the receiver, in terms of the crab, may be a predator trying to eat it. It's actually benefited the receiver because it's not going to get nipped when trying to eat the sender, being the crab. The signal is then evolved and ritualized, used over and over again through association, because it became there was a benefit to the organisms. This genuinely provides information. So it genuinely provides, for example, with the triggerfish here, you do not want to mess with me. I have this defense mechanism. I am angry. Stay away from me. It provides information, and it's used over and over again. There is then a selection pressure. So this is a really interesting dynamic in which survival of the fittest, there is an advantage to the organisms that display this communication behavior, which therefore means there is a higher density of these behaviors in the population, until eventually the entire population harness this behavior or this communication, and it's increased in efficiency and it's used throughout the population. Behaviors also become or evolve to be more similar with less variation. So at the beginning of these processes, there might be variations of this behavior throughout different organisms in different areas. However, over time, this converges across the population to being a very universal communication, such as with the trigger. These can also lead to actual evolutionary changes to the morphology of organisms. So this dorsal fin has actually evolved to be a locking spine, and it's a little bit more specific to that communication. As well as ritualization, communications can occur through this sensory exploitation, which I mentioned earlier with the anglerfish. This involves when there is a conflict of interests. So usually, as I've said before, light in the deep sea would be something very beneficial to many organisms. Light allows them to see more, to see predators, to see prey, to see potential mates. It's an area of safety for lots of organisms. And this signal sent by the sender actually manipulates the receiver. So the sender has evolved to exploit a pre-existing attraction to this light. The interesting thing here is, as I mentioned, this light produced by the Elysium, the organ on the anglerfish, can still be considered a signal rather than a cue, because real light would be beneficial to the receiver. However, the anglerfish has exploited this light, hence sensory exploitation, and has basically meant that this light is now not of benefit to the receiver, being the prey, because they're going to get eaten if they come too close. So sensory exploitation is this conflict of interests, whereby usually light would be something beneficial to both a sender and a receiver. However, it has been taken advantage of by the sender, and the receiver is now facing a consequence in which it's being eaten in this case. Now, this is where it really blurs the line of cue and signal. Like I said, a signal benefits both, and a cue only benefits the sender. Now, there are arguments for both in this case. However, like I've said, this can still be considered a signal because usually light would actually be beneficial to both. However, the sensory exploitation and the biomimicry here has almost kind of blurred that line and potentially made it a cue. So communication occurs in other areas too, and things that we can be watching on every day on the reef. So see if this video works. So we can see here, this is a form of communication too. Cleaning stations have very intricate communications. We have the blue streak cleaner wrasse, and we also have cleaner shrimp, and their job is to feed on parasites living on the tissue of other reef organisms and removing dead skin and these parasites to keep the organism healthy. Now, there is a sender, a receiver, and a signal with all of this behavior. And we can see here things like opening of the gill plates, extending of the spines, opening of the mouth to allow in different reef cleaner fish. And the reef occupants here have evolved through ritualization and through this learned association how to get the best cleaning procedure, and also the cleaner wrasse and cleaner fish have also learned certain signals to allow them in safely. So, like I said, extending spines, opening the mouth, opening of the gill plates, often body positioning. We might see fish vertically or upside down in the water column, and also changing of colours can all be signals sent by the fish to the cleaner wrasse to show I want to be cleaned. The change of colour can potentially show and highlight parasites to be removed or injuries. And there's a very intricate playoff between these communications sent by the fish to the receiver, the cleaner wrasse. Also, reef occupants, so reef fish that live all day every day on the reef, might know where these cleaning stations are through a combination of learned memory and communication. But what about mobile and pelagic species? So what about those manta rays and sharks and big pelagic trevally groups that are moving through that still need to be cleaned? How do they know where to go? Well, cleaners have developed wearing colours which give away their vocation. And often their clients, the receiving fish, are very sensitive to UV wavelengths, and have no problem finding the blue and yellow streaked cleaner wrasse. They are very clear to the receivers. Like I said, they signal to the cleaner wrasse that they'd like a clean as well. They position themselves in an upright manner. They extend their gills, they extend their mouth, they extend their fins. And within this, there are many intricate pieces of communication between the sender, the reef fish or the client, the signal of opening the mouth, extending the gills, and the receiver, the cleaner wrasse. So we can see here, we have a grouper here that we might be quite accustomed to seeing on the reef. The sender being the grouper. We have a signal, open mouth and extended gills to allow there to be for the parasites to be seen, and then the receiver, the blue streak cleaner wrasse, which is picking up on these signals. Now there is a benefit to both, obviously, in this case, hence why it's a signal. The cleaner wrasse is getting its daily snack, and the grouper is getting a much needed clean of parasites and dead skin. So a sender, a signal, and a receiver. Now if this dynamic were to change, and the cleaner wrasse were to cheat, as I've said before in previous lectures, there's this cheating behavior, then the signal from the cleaner wrasse, in which it's signaling that it can give a clean, could then become a cue. It could only benefit one of the individuals. Now, moving off from the reef a little bit, we're going to talk about sperm whales. Sperm whales are an extremely intelligent cetacean species. They have the largest brain of any animal, which is crazy. Like many cetacean species, they communicate through clicks and whistles, and they're believed to have the most highly complex and most highly complex language in the animal kingdom, apart from humans. They have these linear click patterns called codas, which are believed to be a form of communication. There's a lot of things to talk about with these codas, but it's really interesting that they're believed to be learned in early life rather than innate. And they've actually found out that baby calves babble the same way that human babies babble to try and mimic their parents after being exposed, and basically trial and error create the right sounds that we know as language. So the babbling that we see in babies of that toddler age is something that has been observed throughout sperm whale populations, which is really cool. Scientists now think that they have a complex language that includes phrases, names, and the capability to share ideas, which is really, really cool. And a way that this is, why they think this is because codas are now shown to be socially constructed. So within a population that is isolated from another population, or maybe just a little bit spatially distinct from another population, their codas are unique in they have accents and dialects which have been identified using AI and machine learning techniques. And these accents and dialects are different from each population. However, what they found that when these populations merge in meeting points throughout migration patterns for periods of the year, then they spread through the populations, much like fads and trends do in the human youth of today, I guess, like the population in human life in socially constructed areas. So it's really interesting. We have here a pattern of dialogue between two individuals, one called Roger, one called Rita, and it's really interesting. These are basically the coda cycles, and there's intonations of ascending or descending frequency, and you can see here it's repeating and then it's repeated back, and there seems to be very linear patterns here, and I always like to use my imagination here about, Roger asking to go on his 5th diving trip of the year, and Rita answering back, what do you think you're doing? But you can use your own imagination for what they're talking about. Really, really cool example. And it's written about quite in depth in this book called The Deep by James Nestor, and I would really recommend reading this. It's a book basically about freediving, but it talks about the whole history of diving from a point of the scientific decompression theory through to, you know, equipment, freediving competitions, but a huge part of it is talking about ecological processes, dynamics, and conservation too. And the sperm whale communication is a big part of this book, and it is really interesting. So if there's anyone who likes to read, strongly suggest reading The Deep. It's really yeah, thought-provoking to think about some of the research going on with the communications on the reef.
If you like this video, click here to see more like it. Please follow us on social media and feel free to like and share.